Imagine you are a sailor in the Caribbean in the early 18th century. You have been at sea for months. Your clothes are soaked with salt. Your hands are split from pulling ropes. The food is going bad. Fresh water is running low. You sleep wherever you can. And above you stands a captain whose authority is almost absolute. He decides when you work. He decides how you are punished. And after months of exhausting labor, the money waiting for you may be far less than you imagined. Then one morning, a dark shape appears on the horizon. Another ship. A pirate ship. The crew prepares for the worst. But when the pirates come aboard, something unexpected happens. They don't kill everyone. Instead, they make an offer. Join us. Leave your captain behind.
You can join us.
Take a share of what we capture. And for perhaps the first time in your life at sea, have a voice in how the ship is run. The romantic image of the 18th century sailor hides an ugly reality. Life aboard merchant and naval vessels could be brutal. Sailors worked in dangerous conditions where a single mistake could mean a crushed hand, a broken leg, or death overboard. Storms could tear apart sails and rigging. Disease could move through a crowded ship. Food spoiled. Water became foul, and medical treatment was primitive. But danger was only part of the problem. The ship itself was a strict hierarchy. On many vessels, ordinary sailors had little control over their lives. The captain and officers commanded. The crew obeyed. Discipline could be severe, particularly in naval service. A sailor might spend months crossing an ocean, only to discover that the voyage had produced little reward for him. And during wartime, naval manpower demands created another fear: impressment. Men could find themselves forced into naval service, separated from their families, and sent to sea under military discipline. For wealthy merchants and empires, ships carried fortunes. Sugar, tobacco, textiles, silver, spices. For the sailors who moved that wealth across the ocean, life could be very different. They saw the riches. They handled the cargo. They risked their lives protecting it. But they owned almost none of it. A sailor might work for months, surviving storms and disease, only to receive a share so small it barely covered his debts. Wages were low. Deductions were many. And the men at the top grew rich while the men at the bottom struggled. Then came the pirates. When a pirate ship captured a merchant vessel, something unexpected often happened. The pirates did not simply rob the crew and leave. They made an offer. Join us. Become part of our crew. Share in what we take. And suddenly, a poor sailor faced a choice that seemed almost impossible. pirate ships were violent places filled with armed criminals. They were not modern democracies. They were not floating utopias. Yet compared with many ships of their time, some pirate crews operated under surprisingly collective rules. Before or during a voyage, crews could agree to articles governing life aboard the vessel. These rules might describe how prizes would be divided. They could establish compensation for injuries. They could regulate behavior aboard ship. And, crucially, pirate captains did not always possess the same unquestioned authority as captains elsewhere. In some crews, important decisions involved the crew. Captains could be selected, and unpopular captains could sometimes be removed. Another officer, the quartermaster, could represent the interests of the crew and act as a counterweight to the captain's power. During battle, strong leadership was essential. A pirate ship could not hold a debate while cannonballs were tearing through its hull. But outside combat, authority could be more distributed. To an ordinary sailor accustomed to obeying orders from above, this could feel radically different. For once, the men doing the work could have some influence over the rules. That did not make pirates noble. It made piracy attractive. There was another detail hidden inside some pirate articles: compensation for injury. The sea could destroy a man's body in seconds. A cannonball could take a leg. A musket shot could ruin an arm. An explosion could blind a sailor. On an ordinary voyage, a serious injury could destroy a man's ability to earn a living. Some pirate crews attempted to account for that risk. Their articles could specify compensation for severe wounds or lost limbs before the remaining prize money was divided. Think about what that meant to an 18th century sailor. There was no modern workers' compensation system waiting at home. No guaranteed salary for the rest of his life. Losing a hand could mean losing his livelihood. Yet, aboard certain pirate vessels, the crew had agreed that if a man sacrificed part of his body for the voyage, he would receive compensation from the common prize. It was crude. It was dangerous. But in its own way, it was a form of protection. Pirates were thieves. Yet among themselves, they sometimes created rules designed to prevent one another from carrying all the risk, while a small group took all the reward. For sailors who had experienced the opposite, that mattered. Then history created the perfect conditions for piracy to explode. Europe's wars had employed enormous numbers of sailors and privateers. Privateers were privately operated ships, authorized by governments to attack enemy shipping during wartime. To the enemy, they could look very much like pirates, but they carried legal authorization. Then the wars ended. The War of the Spanish Succession came to a close in the early 18th century. Suddenly, many men who had made their living capturing ships were no longer needed. Ships were laid up. Crews were dismissed. Privateering commissions expired. Thousands of experienced seamen entered a world with fewer opportunities. But they still possessed exactly the skills required for piracy. They knew the sea. They knew weapons. They knew trade routes. They knew how to board a ship. They knew where valuable cargo traveled. The war had trained them. peace had made many of them unemployed. Some simply continued doing what they already knew how to do. Only now, there was no government license. The privateer had become the pirate, and if a sailor wanted to disappear into this new world, there was a place waiting for him. Nassau. The Bahamas sat close to some of the most valuable shipping routes in the Atlantic world. The islands offered countless shallow waters, hidden anchorages, and places where smaller vessels could operate effectively. In the early 18th century, weak colonial authority helped turn Nassau into a notorious pirate base. Pirates could gather there, repair ships, trade goods, recruit crews, drink, gamble, exchange information, and plan another voyage. Names that would later become legends moved through this world. Benjamin Hornigold, Charles Vane. For a brief period, Nassau became associated with what has often been called a pirate republic. The phrase makes it sound more organized than it truly was. There was no stable pirate nation in the modern sense. But British authority had become weak enough that pirates could operate with extraordinary freedom. Imagine arriving there as an exhausted sailor. No naval officer waiting to order you back aboard, no merchant captain controlling your pay. Ships coming and going, crews forming, captured goods changing hands. Stories of enormous prizes spreading through taverns. For someone with nothing waiting at home, piracy could begin to look less. But there is a reason the golden age of piracy did not last. Pirate life was terrifying. A pirate could drown in a storm without ever seeing an enemy. He could die from disease. He could be killed by cannon fire. He could be betrayed by another crew. He could spend months at sea and capture almost nothing. And if the authorities caught him, the consequences could be final. Execution. Pirates were hunted, tried, and hanged. Their deaths were sometimes made deliberately public. The message was simple. This is what happens to men who reject the law. And pirates themselves could be brutal. They threatened crews. They stole livelihoods and cargo. Some tortured prisoners. Some murdered. The reality was far darker than the romantic pirate of later fiction. Freedom aboard a pirate ship existed alongside violence, fear, and uncertainty. Yet men continued to join. Why? Because we often compare piracy with the wrong alternative. We imagine a sailor choosing between piracy and a safe, comfortable job. That was rarely the choice. The real comparison could be between a dangerous merchant voyage with poor rewards, a brutal naval career, unemployment after war, or an equally dangerous pirate voyage that offered a share of the prize and some voice aboard ship. Seen from that perspective, the decision becomes easier to understand. Not sensible, not safe. The golden age of piracy lasted only a relatively short time, but its legend survived for centuries. Partly because pirates represented something larger than robbery at sea. They represented rejection. Rejection of captains. Rejection of employers. Rejection of governments. Sometimes even rejection of the social order itself. That is why their story is complicated. Pirates could be violent criminals, while simultaneously creating systems aboard their ships that gave ordinary crewmen more influence than they had experienced elsewhere. They could terrorize innocent sailors while attracting other sailors into their ranks. They could promise freedom while leading men toward prison, battle, and the gallows. The contradiction is the story. For many sailors, the black flag did not promise safety. It promised risk. But their old lives were already filled with risk. The difference was that piracy seemed to offer something in return. A share. A vote. A chance. Perhaps even freedom. So, when a pirate ship appeared on the horizon, and an exhausted sailor was given the opportunity to cross from one deck to another, thousands understood the temptation.